Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy's Smarter Insights into the Mains Answer Writing program. And today we will be discussing General Studies Paper 4 of Mains examination. And this General Studies Paper 4 deals with ethics, integrity and aptitude. And today we have some important questions from ethics portion. So one by one, we'll be understanding the key theme of each of these questions and the structure and presentation of these answers, so that you'll get important insights on how to write mains answers, so that you can also score a very good marks in this paper as well. If you look at the trends of the ethics marks, in fact, ethics, even if you write a decent answer, you'll get a good marks. So therefore, it is very, very important that the cost and benefit ratio for the ethics paper is very good. So therefore, with a less preparation, with a minimal preparation, you can score a very good marks in this paper. So first of all, we'll understand the themes of the question. And apart from that, if you carefully observe the trends of UPSC Mains examination, particularly ethics paper, the questions are very often lengthy. So therefore, they actually poses some challenges in understanding the demand of the question, understanding the key theme of the question. Now, in this discussion, we'll try and understand the key demand of the question in a very simple manner. Now let's first go through this question. It says that in the present digital age, social media has revolutionized our way of communication and interaction. Now here the key theme or key aspect is about the social media. So how social media has revolutionized a way of communication and interaction. However, apart from its positive sides, it has raised several ethical issues as well. And these ethical issues have also created new challenges. So in this particular context, you need to describe ethical dilemmas which involved into it. So firstly, you need to look at the positive side of the social media, because the positive side of the social media is that it has revolutionized the way of communication and interaction. But there are several issues and challenges, and the issues and challenges have raised the key ethical dilemmas, and we need to identify the key ethical dilemmas. So let's go through the model framework of this answer. Now in the introduction, so you just briefly introduce about the good side of the social media. So social media has transformed the global communication, and it has empowered the voices of the people, and it has also led to the democratization of the information. So this is the good side of the social media. And in the body part of the answer, so you need to write the ethical dilemmas, because it has asked about the ethical dilemmas. For example, violations of privacy, misinformation, spreading hate speech, and digital addiction of the youth and students, and mental health concerns that they have with the addiction of social media, and lack of accountability. So these are all the ethical dilemmas that you can highlight with relevant examples. And in the conclusion of this answer, you need to address how these challenges can be addressed. So there is a need for a comprehensive suggestions. So those suggestions can help address these ethical dilemmas. For example, digital literacy. Increasing digital literacy is a means, and ethical regulation, responsible use. So all these things are vital and important for a healthy digital society for a country like India. Right? So this is how you need to have a model framework for a particular answer. So therefore, when you have a model framework, it actually provides you a decent structure. Now in the introduction, let's describe the social media, its advantages, its applications in a very brief and simple manner. So there's no doubt that we have been living in a digital era. The 21st century is considered as a digital era. Now in this digital era, there are several social media platforms like Facebook, X, which is formerly called as Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. So all these social media platforms have revolutionized human interaction, the way we are interacting with other societies, people who are living in other countries. So overall, it has revolutionized or transformed human interaction, and it has enabled the real-time communication of people among the people. and further strengthened civic engagement and democratization of information, because the information sharing, right? So limitless information sharing has led to the democratization of the information. So therefore, in this digital era, the technological revolution that took place has brought forth a lot of ethical dilemmas. Now, the ethical dilemmas deals with privacy, truth, accountability, and social harmony. So whatever ethical dilemmas which are being asked in the question, those ethical dilemmas essentially deals around these components, around these elements: privacy, truth, accountability, and social harmony. Now this is how you need to write a brief introduction in this answer. So let's discuss the body part of the answer. First component is privacy, because the ethical dilemmas, they revolve around the existing components. For example, privacy, which has been part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, because the Puttaswamy judgment held that right to privacy is part of a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. But in this digital era, the increasing addiction of people to the social media platforms, so it has very often led to the violation of the right to privacy and the misuse of the data that has been generated by the users in these social media platforms. For example, the Cambridge Analytica scandal in the year 2018, which is a very popular and a very famous scandal, so that has exposed how Facebook data was misused for political manipulation in UK. Now remember that whenever you write such points, it is always advised that you need to mention at least one example in each of these points. So they could actually make your answer more and more effective and impactful also. And then we should also talk about another component, which is fake news and misinformation, because the social media platforms are also acting as a vehicles of misinformation. They are spreading fake news as well. So therefore, when they spread misinformation and fake news, it undermines truth and it also undermines the public trust. Now, one best example is during COVID-19 pandemic, how the vaccine misinformation has been spread through the social media, right? So this misinformation about the vaccines led to the vaccine hesitancy among the people, that people refused to get vaccinated. Now when people refuse to get vaccinated, so it will be very difficult to control the spread of a disease like COVID-19 pandemic. So this is solely because of the misinformation about the vaccine and its efficacy spread through the social media platforms, right? So therefore, the ethical dilemma here is that the social media platforms are also acting as a vehicles of misinformation and they are spreading fake news. And in fact, hate speech and online trolling is also another major ethical dilemma. So if we talk about hate speech in countries or polarized societies, the hate speech further polarizing the existing society, right? So in a diverse societies, hate speech is polarizing the existing communities. And in fact, online trolling is also another major component of the social media platforms, right? So platforms often become breeding grounds for hate speech and cyberbullying and even the gendered abuse as well, because we very often used to the targeted trolling of journalists and women on Twitter, right? So therefore, the politicization and increasing use of the social media platforms for the political purposes, so all these factors have been led to the hate speech and defamation of the people by trolling them. And then we need to talk about the echo chambers and the polarization of the communities, polarization of the society. For example, the algorithms which analyze tons of data, so they reinforce the existing beliefs in the society. and they also reduce exposure to the diverse opinions. Now, in any society, diverse opinions very important, right? So when there are diverse opinions, those societies are called as plural societies and healthy societies. So therefore, there is a need for the diverse opinions in the societies. But existing algorithms, they are just reinforcing the existing beliefs, and they are preventing the diverse opinions and their growth. So therefore, one example of this is political polarization during elections, and that has been amplified by the social media algorithms. Because the politicization of the social media, politicization of the existing social factors, so they also raise a various ethical concern. And then we need to talk about the mental health and well-being, because it is also an ethical dilemma that has been created by the social media platforms. Because the unrealistic portrayals of life, they foster anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem among the people. The youth need to be confident about their endeavors. Students should be confident about their success. But now the social media platforms, they are influencing the learning outcomes of the students. And social media platforms very often creating anxiety, depression, low self-esteem among the people. So that very often leads to the depression and build up of a lot of stress and even suicidal thoughts as well among the youth. For example, studies linking excessive Instagram use to body image issues among the teenagers. Right, make sure that each point should have at least one example to make it more and more effective and impactful. And then we should be talking about the accountability and ethical governance as well. Because if you look at the social media platforms, the major problem with the social media platforms is that there's a lack of transparency in content moderation. Right? So there is no transparency, there is no accountability when it comes to the social media platforms, and there's also a lack of adequate regulation. So therefore, all these problems raises questions about the fairness and bias in the social media platforms. For example, the allegations of algorithmic bias in content takedowns and censorship. Now you have identified the ethical issues which are prevalent because of the social media platforms or misuse of the social media platforms. And then you should emphasize on some suggestions as well. So when you write suggestions, the answer will look holistic. For example, there is a need for a greater regulation of the social media platforms. There is a need for accountability, transparency. There is a need for the ethical governance. For that, the government can mandate certain guidelines for the social media platforms. And there should be a larger awareness generation programs have to be started with a multi-stakeholder partnerships. So therefore, you need to write a multiple suggestions in the answer to make it more comprehensive and effective. And finally, you need to write the conclusion of this answer. Now, in fact, it is true that social media has democratized the communication. So this is what we have understood so far. So despite the social media platforms have democratized communication, because ease of communication with which we are communicating with the people around the world. So therefore, we could say that social media has democratized the communication, but despite that, there are some ethical dilemmas which are prevalent and they threaten privacy, truth, and social cohesion, social harmony. So therefore, in this context, there is a need for a balanced approach. Through this balanced approach, so we need to bring programs for digital literacy among the people, ethical design, robust regulation of the social media platforms. So therefore, all these essential measures have to be taken to harness the potential of social media in a responsible and sustainable manner. And that's how you need to write conclusion for this answer. I hope you have understood this answer. And next question, It is a very lengthy question, but it is easy question. So let's first understand the key theme of this question. It says that constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment, but a product of civil education and adherence of rule of law. So this is how constitutional morality has been defined in the question itself. Now, in this particular context, examine the significance of constitutional morality for a public servant and then highlight the role in promoting good governance and ensuring accountability in the public administration. So first of all, you could define what constitutes a constitutional morality in the introduction and how this constitutional morality is important for a public servant, so that this public servant can ensure good governance and also ensure accountability in the public administration. Right? So you could briefly talk about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, because Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, he emphasized on the constitutional morality. So therefore, this constitutional morality signifies the adherence to the constitutional values over the personal or the political interests. So personal interests are not supreme, political interests are also not superior, but the constitutional values are superior. So this is how about the constitutional morality you could write a brief introduction. And then in the body part of the answer, you need to write, for public servants, it ensures rule of law, integrity, impartiality, and protection of citizens' rights, and even transparent decision making, which is core to good governance and accountability. So when you write the body part of the answer, always remember the key theme of the question, and you need to address the demand of the question, and you need to write about all these important elements, and you should also mention examples in each of these elements, so that the answer would look more comprehensive and holistic. And in conclusion, upholding the constitutional morality, it strengthens democracy and ethical public administration. Right? So in a brief way, you can write the conclusion for this answer. So let's understand constitutional morality and its significance in public administration. In the introduction, as we have just discussed, that you could mention about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, because he emphasized on the value of constitutional morality. Now, in fact, constitutional morality is a value, is a concept that must be cultivated through education and respect for the rule of law. Now, what is this rule of law? Now, rule of law means absence of arbitrary power. Everyone is equal before the law. So that is the fundamental definition of rule of law. So it means that adherence to the principles and spirit of the Constitution. And in fact, if we talk about the fundamental principles which are enshrined in the Indian Constitution, they form part of the Indian Constitution. They form core part of the Indian Constitution, includes justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. You can find all these concepts of values in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. Preamble of the Indian Constitution talks about these fundamental values. Right? In fact, the core and fundamental values, they also forms part of the constitutional morality. However, for any public servant, constitutional morality acts as an ethical compass, because if we talk about the constitutional morality, it deals with justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, the constitutional morality for a public servant, it acts as an ethical compass, and it ensures integrity of the services that he has been delivering, duties that a public servant has been delivering, fairness and accountability in the governance. So therefore, this is how you can write a brief introduction in this answer, but make sure that you emphasize on the constitutional morality in the introduction. And then in the body part of the answer, what you need to write. So you need to write the meaning and essence of the constitutional morality. Now, in fact, the constitutional morality deals with the constitutional values and the constitutional values are supreme over the personal values, personal interests, and the political interests. So this is how you can define the constitutional morality. For example, what are these constitutional values which are supreme over the personal interests and the political interests? For example, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, democracy, or democratic values, right? So they are actually part of the constitutional morality. For example, upholding secularism and also equality while framing policies irrespective of the political pressure that a public servant has been facing, right? So secularism also forms part of the basic structure doctrine, and equality is an important component which is part of the rule of law. And again, rule of law indicates the value of constitutional morality. So I hope it is clear. Now in the body part of the answer, let's understand the significance of constitutional morality for the public servants. Now in fact, constitutional morality will help and assist public servants in upholding the rule of law. Now as I have already told you, what constitutes a rule of law? So rule of law says that there will be no arbitrary authority for the state. And in fact, state will have a certain limitations, and those limitations will be set by a rule book called Constitution. And rule of law also says that everyone equal before the law. So therefore, the constitutional morality will help assist the public servants upholding rule of law. So therefore, it ensures decisions are based on law and they are not based on whims or favoritism. And you need to write an example here as well. For example, the honest enforcement of anti-corruption laws without any discrimination. And then we need to talk about a good governance, because constitutional morality also help promote good governance as well, because constitutional morality will help encourage transparency, responsiveness, and ethical decision making of the public servants. For example, implementation of the Right to Information Act of 2005. Now, implementation of the Right to Information Act, it empowers citizens with information. So it reflects the values of transparency and accountability. And then we need to talk about citizens' rights, because citizens' rights also forms part of the constitutional morality, right? So they are core values. Now public servants should safeguard the constitutional rights to all citizens, especially the marginalized sections of the society. For example, IAS officer Durga Shakti Nagpal. So she took a stand against illegal sand mining, and that has been reflected in her commitment to the justice, right? So this is how you need to include examples in each of these points. And then ensuring accountability, because officers who believed in the constitutional morality, so it further helps ensuring accountability while delivering their functions, delivering their duties, right? So because it encourages self-restraint and responsibility in the exercise of power, they will act in a more responsible and accountable manner when they are performing or delivering their duties. For example, Supreme Court in Navtej Singh Johar case of 2018, Supreme Court has emphasized on the constitutional morality over the societal morality, so thereby ensuring protection of the individual rights, right? So this is how you have to include examples in almost each of these points. And ultimately in the conclusion of this answer, so we have understood how constitutional morality has been guiding the public servant in promoting good governance, also ensuring accountability. So therefore, constitutional morality is an ethical foundation for the democratic governance, particularly for a country like India. For public servants, the constitutional morality ensures that power is exercised in a responsible manner within the constitutional limits, and it will promote transparency, accountability, justice, liberty, equality. So all these features are cornerstone of good governance and also the accountable administration. So this is how an impactful positive conclusion you can add to this answer. And next question. Karl von Clausewitz once said, war is a diplomacy by other means. Now critically analyze the above statement in the present context of contemporary geopolitical conflict. Now understand, if you look at the contemporary geopolitical conflicts, there's Russia-Ukraine war, which has been going on, excuse me, and Israel-Gaza conflict. And apart from that, there are some geopolitical conflicts as well around the world. And in fact, Karl von excuse me. So Karl von Clausewitz once said that war is a diplomacy by other means. So it's actually diplomacy, but it uses other means. For example, it uses the violent means, but war is also part of diplomacy. And this statement that you need to critically analyze with giving the contemporary geopolitical examples, right? So in the introduction, war is an extension of the politics when diplomacy fails, linking military action to state objectives. Now in the body part of the answer, you need to mention about the contemporary conflicts. There are some contemporary conflicts such as Israel-Hamas conflict, Russia-Ukraine war. And in fact, both these conflicts, they reflect political motives behind warfare, but yet a modern interdependence, nuclear deterrence, humanitarian concerns. So all these factors, they limit utility of the war. And you should also write the conclusion. And in the conclusion, you need to write an appropriate way forward as well, right? So you need to emphasize on diplomacy and multilateralism because they could effectively deal with the contemporary geopolitical conflicts. So this is how you need to have a basic framework for this answer. Now in the introduction, you could briefly introduce about Karl von Clausewitz. Now this particular theorist is from a Prussian military theorist, and he famously held that war is a mere continuation of policy by other means, right? So it is just a continuation of policy, but it uses other means. And in fact, he viewed war not as an isolated act but as a political instrument. And when diplomacy is failed, then war will be used as a political instrument to pursue the ends of different states. So this is how Karl von Clausewitz viewed at war. But in 21st century, war remains a tool of power politics. But its nature, its legitimacy, all these things have evolved amid global interdependence, international law, humanitarian concerns, multilateralism, globalization. So because of all these things, the war has evolved, even though war is still relevant in the global power politics. So let's understand the body part of the answer. Now, first understand the relevance of Clausewitz's idea. So what exactly is the relevance of Clausewitz's idea? Now, if we talk about the Clausewitz idea, states still employ force to achieve the political objectives, because war is still used as a political tool to achieve the objectives, right? So whenever diplomacy fails, war comes in to achieve the political ends, political objectives of the states. For example, the Russia-Ukraine war, which was started in the year 2022, it still continues, and it reflects the use of war to pursue the geopolitical aims of countries. For example, NATO has the geopolitical aims, and Russia also has some geopolitical aims. So therefore, they have been using war as a political tool to achieve their goals, achieve their objectives. Now, in fact, war as a continuation of political strategy when diplomacy fails, because a military action it very often seeks to change or alter the political and strategic realities. Because the greatest example is Hamas and Israel conflict. And this particular conflict mainly focuses on national security and political dominance in the region. And US invasion of Iraq to secure geopolitical influence and alleged weapons control. Right? So therefore, war as a continuation of the political strategy of the countries. For example, US invasion of Iraq is just a continuation of political strategy of US. And Israel-Hamas conflict is also a continuation of political strategy of the respective factions, so that they will have the political dominance over the region, and they will also have a leverage, an edge over the national security. However, so still war has been used as a political tool to achieve the objectives. However, the war has been evolving over a period of time that has led to the changing nature of the warfare. The warfare's nature has been changing because the modern wars involve economic sanctions, cyber warfare, and information warfare. So they blurred the lines between the peace and conflict. For example, US-China trade war and cyber attacks. So these factors illustrate or highlight diplomacy taking a non-military coercive forms. So US-China trade war, a tariff war, cyber attacks. So all these factors have been emphasizing that diplomacy has been taking a non-military but coercive forms. However, let's understand some limitations to the Clausewitz theory. Now we are living in a globalized, interconnected, nuclear world. Now in this world, war often leads to the humanitarian crisis. So we have known the humanitarian crisis in Israel-Hamas conflict, Russia-Ukraine conflict, right? So therefore, in a globalized world, it will lead to the diplomatic isolation of the people, and war also leads to the large-scale humanitarian crisis. So because of all these reasons, there will be sanctions on countries, global backlash against Russia, sanctions imposed on Russia, unilateral sanctions by both Europe and US. So therefore, all these factors have been diminishing the utility of war as a policy. Countries are not pursuing war as a policy because they are fearing sanctions, because we are living in a globalized world. And in the conclusion of this answer, what you should write? Now, in the conclusion of this answer, the Clausewitz dictum retains partial validity. That means it is still valid, but war still serves the political ends. And in fact, the contemporary global order emphasizes on diplomacy, dialogue, multilateralism over military coercion. And in fact, in today's interconnected world, sustainable peace, not victory, defines successful statecraft. And that's how you need to write a positive and optimistic conclusion in this answer. That's all in this session, and thank you so much. So please subscribe our YouTube channel and also like a video. Thank you so much.